Everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. So today what we're going to be talking about is Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League and the potential that this game may have an Avengers style setting in terms of its setup. Now, this is not something that's been confirmed. If anything, I think this is probably going to be the opposite of all of that. Now, let me go ahead and preface my video with the fact that people wanted something from Marvel's Avengers and didn't necessarily understand or get it. And if you look at the Suicide Squad game, it appears to me that even though they may have a strong story, they have a very compelling plot, and even the setup is so amazing in terms of the way they brought the characters together, or at least introduced the characters. I strongly believe that this game is more than likely going to follow some sort of a format in order for them to be able to leverage, I would say, much more in terms of continuity of the game. But nonetheless, where Avengers failed was in its quality and its huge centeredness on microtransactions in terms of skins and cosmetics. It appeared that that game really wanted to run its course like some of these mobile games that you're going to see. It didn't necessarily structure itself like a console game, a full-blown title. I think in Suicide Squad, what we've seen so far from the trailers is compelling story and plot points where it will really showcase what the game is about from a story perspective, and then continuity will approach an end game side of things. So let's just dive in and let's basically talk about some of the places I see some very strong differences. Now, before I continue, if it's something that you want to do, please hit the like button for this video, or even, consider subscribing to join the Video Game Fight School community. We really love the DC games out here, and we talk about them a lot. So what are some of the differences? Well, first things first is Marvel used the Avengers in terms of their own game, and this is something that was done published by Square Enix. And I think the big issue that they had here was the Avengers franchise was already established. People had already gained and formed different connections with the different Avengers from the cinematic universe. Now, if you think about the Avengers, the very first few pictures that you're going to see is Robert Downey Jr. for Iron Man. You're going to see Chris Hemsworth for Thor, Scarlett Johansson for Black Widow, and all of the above, right? But when they then eventually brought it to the game in terms of how they were implementing it, they used a whole different set of character models, and this was something that it wasn't really easy to adopt. Now consider the Suicide Squad game. Most of these characters, or at least some of them, have been shown in other video games, and we've come to expect that there are different tellings, different universes, different voice actors, different character models over time. I mean, yes, this is probably one of the more recent times we're seeing Superman, but there had been a Superman game way back in the day. For us to be able to say, oh, we're going to conflate the Justice League movie, with the Justice League that we're going to be seeing in the Suicide Squad. We've seen different iterations of Wonder Woman in the past from the animated series and all over the place, and they didn't necessarily hold as much as a popularity as the Avengers held in the last 10 years. So it's really easy for us to be able to separate those from our minds. And also, Harley Quinn has been in the works for a long time in terms of her following the Joker from Arkham Asylum all the way through Arkham City, and then even having her in Arkham Knight. It just basically established that character in a video game world. So for us to see Harley Quinn in a video game, we're not expecting the Harley Quinn that was played by whatever her name is. I can't remember, the young lady from Australia that played the Suicide Squad Harley Quinn movies. And so they're just kind of two different people. So it's easy for the fans of Suicide Squad to be able to separate our minds from there. And so I think this is something that was very important. A lot of people said, man, it would have been really expensive to get, the original cast of the movies to come and play voice actors for the video game. But many people said, okay, well, they could probably understand and kind of put that aside. But for someone like me, it was really hard because I think I was one of the first people that watched the Marvel's Avengers movie when it first came out. I went in and watched that movie 3D by myself. I invited my friends. They were like, no, we don't even know what that is. And I was like, I'm going to go sit down and watch it. And I sat there in 3D and I just folded my hands and just had a big, huge smile on my face. So those characters have imprinted some sort of an impression on me that it was kind of hard to, just basically distance the original Iron Man with the one that was being voiced by another actor. Now, Now, this is not something that seemed to be a big deal, but if you go back and kind of reduce it, what would have helped Avengers? And I think that would have been a really strong story and plot line. You see, in terms of Suicide Squad, what we already have is a really interesting story and plot line. I mean, I don't think we necessarily saw this coming in a video game segment in terms of how this works. There have been literature and all kinds of different depictions of the Suicide Squad and the Justice League in some kind of a conundrum, but none of us would have ever thought that we would see this in tandem. You see, the way they actually present Amanda Waller in this game, you can tell that there's going to be some sort of a story and a plot line that centers around her. We got to see the Penguin. So it's not only that we're going to be looking at the Justice League, it appears that we're also going to be looking at some of the different villains that are related to the Justice League members. Now, the Penguin already tells you that a very significant character might be in the background somewhere, but we haven't necessarily seen that character, and that is possibly Batman. And I think this is probably the big surprise that Rocksteady is probably holding back. So in terms of their marketing, in terms of the way they've actually kind of brought this game out, they've actually brought a bigger coalition of all of the characters that they can kind of get their hands on, including the ones that have already been established in their universe. I think this is what's going to be really the big successful factor for their game. Now, again, they didn't necessarily seem like they were advertising this game to mimic many other games, except in gameplay. We talked about Sunset Overdrive being one of the games that was kind of somewhat visually similar to this game, but at the end of the day, it just didn't necessarily even hold up because this game has a very specific and unique target. It's like a game that they tell you the overall plot, and at the end of the day, they have to forge that, the arc in terms of how your characters are going to get, pulled from jail, and then they're going to be sent after the Suicide Squad, which is, in my opinion, an insurmountable task for them. They're all regular human beings, or except for King Shark. I don't know where the heck that guy came from, but they are not necessarily as powerful as the Justice League members, but they've been given this insurmountable task, which is basically clued everybody to now dial in to say, how in the world is the writing, how in the world are the events going to get these, thugs or bandits or whatever you want to call them, these villains who are basically, in a sense, almost low level for, somebody like Superman or Flash to pretty much go against them. And I think this is where the crux of the matter really does lie. And this is where its entire plot line allows for Marvel's Avengers this potential to shine, I said Marvel's Avengers allows for Suicide Squad more potential to shine more than Marvel's Avengers. So where Avengers failed, I think Suicide Squad has the opportunity to do much better. I'm not saying Suicide Squad will do much better. I'm saying there's an opportunity for them to do much better. And so when you think about this and you kind of pour this down the drain and say, okay, where are we going to land? I think finally we have ourselves in a position where, in terms of development, I think there is much more experience with pristine development on the Rocksteady side regarding superhero games. Now, look at Square Enix. They just recently published, in the past few years, 2 Marvel superhero games. Now, both games happen to be really interesting because Marvel's Avengers was kind of a stitch together. They brought all these people from these different big studios to kind of get this game going. They brought a combat director from God of War and all of this stuff. And I think that kind of, in a sense, worked out for them. But you could tell that there wasn't necessarily too much of the experience in delivering something with a core aspect of it. Now, if you look at, say, the Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy game, I think what they did was they decided to focus more on the plot and the story because that's what really appeals to gamers at large. In terms of gameplay, what they actually did was mimic the gameplay to look very similar to one of their other games that they've done in the past. In terms of, say, I think Final Fantasy 14 was much more reminiscent of the gameplay. So they worked on their strengths and then they went ahead and developed the side that would appeal to gamers. This is where Marvel's Avengers itself failed. They didn't necessarily have, in my opinion, much strength. The studio had a lot of veterans that came in to get the game delivered, but there wasn't necessarily much that was commonly shared among them, in my opinion anyways, that they could actually harp on. So the game felt like a cheap mobile game that was there to just farm players from all of their money. Whereas Guardians of the Galaxy told a very compelling story and had a gameplay gameplay loop that the team was already well versed with. In terms of Rocksteady, story has always been something for them. Yes, you may criticize Arkham Knight, but they still made the efforts to go ahead and tell a story. They still made an effort to go ahead and provide some dynamic gameplay using the Batmobile. Even though then it was highly criticized, now it's a work of art because many other games don't necessarily do things like that. And so they took the step and the boldness to be able to say, hey, we can create a dynamic and multi-dynamic game and still deliver as much as you, the audience members, can enjoy. Now, yes, the boss fights were mediocre in that game, but now this is a game full of fights with bosses that you cannot necessarily beat. So I think they're going for something that's way out there. And I think this is what's going to really count towards their success. And hopefully they don't make critical errors that the Avengers game made. And then when it comes to monetization and microtransactions, I guess that's going to be a whole nother conversation. So stay tuned for part 2 of this video, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Peace out.